Your neighbors aren't who you think they are. You just haven't seen the proof yet. Because proof requires pressure, and pressure requires collapse, and collapse requires one very specific thing: the lights going out and staying out. A blackout doesn't change people. It decodes them. It strips away the performance of civility that modern infrastructure makes possible, and forces every single person on your street to answer a question they've never been asked before. Who are you when nothing works and nobody's watching? And the answer, confirmed by every documented grid failure in modern history, is almost never what the person standing next to you at the mailbox would have you believe. This video isn't about survival tips. It's about the psychological truths that a prolonged blackout drags into the open. The hidden behaviors, the buried instincts, the social masks that fall off one by one as the hours turn into days. These are the dark sides of your neighbors that only a blackout can expose, and once you see them, you will never look at your street the same way again. Number 6. The hoarder who was hiding in plain sight. Here's something that will reframe the way you see your entire neighborhood. Right now, today, with the lights on and the grocery stores open, at least one household on your block is sitting on a supply reserve that would shock you. And you have no idea. They look normal. They shop normal. They live normal. But behind closed doors, inside closets, in garages, in basements, they've been quietly accumulating for months or years. And you will never know about it until the power goes out and the contrast becomes visible. Because a blackout creates the one condition that exposes hidden abundance: universal scarcity. When everyone else is running low, the household that isn't starts to stand out. Not through anything obvious. Through absence. Absence of panic. Absence of desperation. Absence of the frantic energy that everyone else is radiating. And that calm, that eerie composure on day 3 when the rest of the block is unraveling, becomes the loudest signal on the street. Behavioral analysts who study residential preparedness patterns call this the calm divergence indicator. When a household's emotional state visibly separates from the neighborhood baseline during a crisis, it communicates one thing: insulation. And insulation means resources. During the extended outages following Hurricane Maria, community-level observation reports documented that households later confirmed to have substantial reserves were initially identified not by visible supplies but by behavioral composure. They weren't stressed enough. They weren't asking enough questions. They weren't participating in the communal anxiety. And that composure gap became the first data point in an informal targeting process. Here's the part that makes this a dark side revelation. The hoarder isn't necessarily selfish. Many of them prepared responsibly. Many of them tried to be ready. But the blackout doesn't care about your intentions. It only cares about optics. And the optic of one family appearing unbothered while the rest of the street deteriorates creates a resentment so deep and so fast that the prepared household goes from neighbor to enemy in under 72 hours. Not because they did anything wrong, because their composure betrayed their advantage. And in a neighborhood running out of patience, advantage is indistinguishable from guilt. The blackout exposes the hoarder not by revealing what they stored but by revealing what they can't fake: the absence of fear in a place where fear should be universal. Number 5. The manipulator who runs on crisis fuel. Let me tell you something that sounds harsh until you watch it play out in real time across a powerless neighborhood. Some people don't just survive a crisis, they come alive in one. And your street has at least one of them. In normal life, they might be quiet, unremarkable, maybe even overlooked. But the moment systems break down and social structures dissolve, a specific personality type emerges that thrives in chaos. Psychologists who study dark personality traits under stress call this crisis-activated dominance. It describes individuals whose need for control, influence, and social leverage is normally suppressed by functioning institutions, but becomes fully operational the moment those institutions fail. They don't panic during a blackout. They organize, but not for the group's benefit, for positioning. They begin making decisions nobody asked them to make. They start assigning roles. They control information flow. They decide who gets updates, who gets included, who gets excluded. And they do it so naturally, so confidently that the rest of the neighborhood follows without questioning why this person is suddenly in charge. And here's the dark truth underneath it. The manipulator doesn't seize power through force. They seize it through the vacuum. In a functioning society, leadership is distributed across systems: police, government, utility companies, employers. When those systems go dark, there's a leadership void. and the manipulator fills it before anyone else even recognizes it exists. Research on informal power structures during civilian crises has found that self-appointed community leaders during disasters frequently display elevated traits associated with narcissistic and Machiavellian personality profiles, not because disasters attract them, because disasters unlock them. The structure that normally keeps these traits in check disappears, and what emerges is a person who was always wired for control, but never had the environment to exercise it. During documented post-storm community breakdowns, case studies repeatedly identified individuals who leveraged their early organizational role to later control resource distribution, dictate group decisions, and systematically marginalize anyone who challenged their authority. They started as helpers, they became gatekeepers, and by the time the neighborhood realized what had happened, the manipulator controlled the social architecture of the block. The blackout doesn't create the manipulator. It just finally gives them a stage. And the dark side it exposes isn't just about one person. It's about how quickly everyone else surrenders autonomy to whoever speaks first with confidence. Your neighborhood isn't as independent as it thinks. It's one crisis away from following whoever takes the microphone, and the person who grabs it fastest is rarely the one with the best intentions. Number 4. The surveiller who's been cataloging you for years. Here's the one that will make your skin crawl because it's already happening and you just can't see it yet. Every neighborhood has a watcher, someone who sits, observes, and files information with a precision that would unsettle you if you knew the extent of it. In normal life, this behavior is invisible. It's masked by routine. The person on their porch every morning, the neighbor who always seems to be in their yard when you come and go, the one who comments on your new car, your delivery packages, your visitors, your schedule. With a little too much detail, you brush it off. You call it friendly. You call it nosy at worst. But a blackout reveals what that watching actually produced. A comprehensive behavioral and resource profile of your household that required zero technology to build. This is what surveillance professionals call passive human intelligence collection. It's the gathering of operationally useful information through sustained observation without active engagement. And your neighborhood surveiller has been doing it, consciously or not, for years. They know when you leave for work. They know how many cars you own. They know your delivery frequency. They know when you go on vacation. They know which rooms light up at night. They know if you garden, if you grill, if you have a dog, if your garage is full or empty. And in a functioning society, none of that information has value. But in a blackout, every single data point becomes tactically relevant. During extended outages documented across multiple hurricane and ice storm events, law enforcement debriefs consistently noted that targeted homers were selected based on information that could only have come from sustained prior observation by someone within the immediate residential area. Not professional surveillance, neighbor surveillance. The kind that happens so slowly and so casually that nobody recognizes it as intelligence gathering until the grid fails and that intelligence gets used. And here's the deeply uncomfortable part. The surveiller might not even realize what they've been doing. Chronic observation can be habitual, driven by anxiety, loneliness, boredom, or control needs, but conscious or not, the product is the same. A detailed map of your household's patterns, vulnerabilities, and resources that exists entirely inside another person's memory, inaccessible to you, invisible to everyone, and activated the moment desperation provides a reason to use it. The blackout exposes the surveiller not by changing their behavior, but by changing the value of what they already know. Information that was gossip on Monday becomes operational intelligence by Thursday, and the person holding it doesn't need a plan. They just need a motive. And a blackout manufactures motives by the hour. Number 3. The moral negotiator who rewrites the rules in real time. Let me hit you with a psychological phenomenon that makes a blackout truly dangerous. More dangerous than the hunger, the cold, or the darkness itself. It's not that people abandon morality during a crisis. It's that they rebuild it from scratch, on terms that serve their immediate needs. And that process is happening inside your neighbor's head right now. The moment resources shrink and consequences disappear. Psychologists call it situational moral reconstruction. It's the real-time rewriting of ethical boundaries based on environmental conditions. And it doesn't produce guilt. It produces justification. That's what makes it so terrifying. Your neighbor doesn't break into your garage thinking, quote, 0. They break into your garage thinking, quote, 1. Every moral line gets redrawn. Every principle gets reevaluated against a new baseline where the old rules no longer apply because the system that enforced those rules no longer exists. Research on ethical reasoning under extreme stress demonstrates that moral frameworks are far more fluid than people believe. Under sustained deprivation and perceived threat, individuals don't just bend their principles, they construct entirely new ones that retroactively justify actions they would have condemned 48 hours earlier. The reconstruction happens in layers. First, the old rules get questioned. Is it really stealing if the stores are closed and no one's coming to help? Then the new rules get proposed. In a situation like this, sharing isn't optional, it's mandatory. Then the new rules get enforced socially. Anyone who refuses to share is putting themselves above the community, and by the time your neighbor is standing at your door with 2 other families behind them, they aren't violating their morality. They're following it. A new morality, one they wrote this morning, one that makes you the villain and them the righteous. During post-crisis behavioral studies conducted after prolonged outages and disaster events across the United States, researchers found that individuals who engaged in resource-related confrontations overwhelmingly reported that they believed their actions were morally correct at the time. Not excusable, correct. They had rebuilt the ethical framework so completely that what they did felt virtuous. The blackout exposes the moral negotiator by removing the fixed ethical infrastructure that kept their behavior predictable. Laws, courts, social reputation, religious community, career consequences, all of those anchors get pulled up in a grid failure. And what's left isn't lawlessness, it's something worse. It's a new law, written by desperation, enforced by numbers, and believed with absolute sincerity by the people following it. And the person leading that moral reconstruction might be the same neighbor who brought you cookies last Christmas. The dark side isn't that they became immoral. It's that they became moral on entirely different terms, and their new morality has you listed as the problem. Number 2, the tribalist who was always drawing lines you couldn't see. Here's the dark side that nobody wants to name because it implicates everyone. A blackout doesn't just expose individual behavior. It exposes the tribal architecture that was silently operating inside your neighborhood the entire time. Lines you never saw, categories you didn't know existed, social hierarchies that were invisible under the equalizing hum of electricity and commerce, now suddenly visible, rigid, and weaponized. Because here's what happens when resources collapse and the comfortable middle ground disappears. People retreat to their smallest loyalty circle. Family first, then close friends, then people who look like them, think like them, live like them. Everyone else becomes outside, other, distant. And that distance grows faster than you would believe possible. Social psychologists call this deprivation-triggered tribal regression. It describes the rapid contraction of social identity boundaries under resource stress, where the definition of quote 5 shrinks and the definition of quote 6 expands until the word quote 7 no longer carries any cooperative weight at all. During the 1977 New York blackout, post-event analysis revealed that neighborhood cooperation during the crisis fractured almost entirely along pre-existing social and economic lines. Blocks that appeared integrated before the outage splintered into microgroups defined by income, tenure, household composition, and familiarity. The people who helped each other were the people who already shared unstated social identity. The people who didn't were treated as outsiders, even if they lived 30 feet away. And that pattern has repeated in every major extended outage since. After Katrina, after Sandy, after the Texas grid failure. The tribal lines don't get created by the blackout. They get revealed by it. They were always there, embedded in who invites whom to barbecues, who waves and who doesn't, who parks where, who talks to whom, whose kids play together. A functioning grid papers over those divisions with shared convenience. Everyone uses the same power company. Everyone shops at the same store. Everyone watches the same weather report. But pull the plug and the shared experience evaporates. And what's underneath is a neighborhood that was never really one neighborhood at all. It was clusters of micro-tribes coexisting under the illusion of unity. And the dark side the blackout exposes isn't that people become tribal. It's that they always were. The electricity was just making it invisible. The moment the grid fails, every unspoken division becomes a spoken one. And spoken divisions become defended ones. And defended divisions become hostile ones. Your neighbor 3 doors down who you've never really connected with doesn't become your enemy during a blackout. The blackout just finally makes it visible that they were never really your ally. And that truth, quiet and uncomfortable as it is, will define who survives and who gets left outside the circle when the pressure becomes real. Number 1. The person who discovers they're capable of things they never imagined. This is the darkest side of all, and it's the one that lives inside every single person on your street, including you. A blackout doesn't just expose who your neighbors are, it exposes who they can become. And that transformation is the most terrifying thing documented in any disaster study ever conducted, because the dark side isn't a fixed trait sitting inside certain people waiting to emerge. It's a capacity, a universal one. Every human being carries the neurological and psychological architecture for behaviors they would currently find unthinkable: aggression, theft, deception, intimidation, coercion, betrayal. Under normal conditions, those capacities stay dormant, suppressed by comfort, consequence, and social identity. But under sustained deprivation, when the frontal cortex is flooded with cortisol and the amygdala runs unchecked, those capacities activate, not in monsters, in everyone. Neuropsychological research on behavior under prolonged threat conditions shows that extended stress fundamentally alters decision-making architecture in the human brain. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for impulse control, moral reasoning, and long-term consequence evaluation, becomes progressively impaired. Meanwhile, the limbic system, responsible for threat detection, territorial aggression, and survival-driven action, becomes dominant. The result is a human being who still looks like your neighbor but is now operating on cognitive firmware that hasn't been updated since the Pleistocene, and that firmware doesn't care about property lines, social contracts, or the fact that you brought them a casserole last Thanksgiving. During extensive post-disaster psychological evaluations, researchers have consistently found that individuals who engaged in aggressive, criminal, or socially destructive behavior during extended crises overwhelmingly had no prior history of such behavior. They weren't predisposed. They were activated. The environment created conditions that unlocked behavioral capacities they had never accessed before and genuinely didn't know they possessed. And here's the part that makes this the most important point on this entire list. The neighbor who discovers what they're capable of during a blackout doesn't experience that discovery as corruption. They experience it as clarity. The stress strips away what they now perceive as the soft, naive version of themselves and replaces it with someone harder, faster, more decisive. They don't feel like they've lost something. They feel like they've finally stopped pretending. And that reframing is what makes the transformation stick. It's not temporary psychosis. It's identity reorganization under pressure. The person who takes food from your garage on day 5 doesn't go home feeling like a criminal. They go home feeling like a survivor, a protector, a parent who did what needed to be done. And tomorrow, the threshold for what ate will be lower. And the day after that, lower still, because each action recalibrates the moral baseline downward, and the person doing it feels more justified with every step, not less. The blackout doesn't reveal a hidden monster inside your neighbor. It reveals something far more unsettling, a completely ordinary human being discovering, in real time, that the line between civilized and uncivilized was never a wall. It was a curtain, and the power grid was the only thing holding it closed. And that's what a blackout truly exposes. Not criminals hiding among good people, not predators wearing friendly masks, something far more disturbing than either of those comfortable narratives. It exposes the fact that the difference between the neighbor who helps you and the neighbor who harms you is not character, it's circumstance. Remove the right circumstances, remove electricity, remove food access, remove law enforcement, remove the comfortable certainty that tomorrow will look like today, and every person on your block enters a psychological space where the rules they've followed their entire life suddenly feel optional, not because they've changed, because the environment that shaped their behavior has changed. And behavior, all of it, the good and the terrible, was always a response to environment more than it was a product of character. That's the dark side your neighborhood is hiding in plain sight. Not darkness inside certain people, darkness inside the system. A system made of wires and supply chains and badges and streetlights. Pull the plug and the darkness doesn't arrive from somewhere else. It was always here. The electricity was just keeping it out of sight. And the moment the grid goes down, you'll see your street for what it always was. Not a community held together by trust. A collection of strangers held together by infrastructure. And infrastructure, unlike character, can fail overnight.